Good evening, class. Right. So we were doing thinkers again, and yesterday we have done till culture, personality, school. That is Colorado boys. Then now I was also telling you one important area for them is nation character studies, especially after scenario of war, be it Russia, Ukraine, be it Iran, Israel, be it lot of geopolitical issues which have been existing. Understanding nation character studies become important, right? So in that context you kindly go through. Okay, so keep that aspect. Definitely you will mention about Ruth Benedict and Margaret Mead with respect to that. Okay, so keep that scenario alive when it comes to nation character studies. Now coming to the next school, that is neo evolutionism. Now in neo evolutionism you see GV Child. In the context of GV Child, one very famous book, The Understanding of the Social Evolution, and GV Child majorly known with respect to Neolithic Revolution. With respect to Neolithic Revolution, and he also deals with urban revolution. He also deals with urban revolution. Now, where in the context of urban revolution, it's very simple that with the social structure developing, there is development of bureaucracy. With the development of bureaucracy, you see a redistribution developed. With the development of redistribution, you see the concept of taxation. With the concept of taxation, you see the emergence of archaic state. The emergence of archaic state, and the overall understanding of urban revolution was this. Now, where all can you write GV Child? Definitely in 1.8, you can write GV Child. And more importantly, his understanding was universal evolution. His understanding was universal evolution. And in 1.8 also, especially when we're talking about tool technology, and we are also with respect to the biocultural aspects which are to be specified here, that can also be mentioned when it comes to GV Child, right? That can also be mentioned when it comes to GV Child. Now, apart from that, we also see another very important thinker in neo-evolutionism is Leslie Alvin White. Now, in the context of Leslie Alvin White, there are two famous works. One, The Science of Culture. One is The Science of Culture. The other one is The Evolution of Culture. One is The Science of Culture. The evolution is Evolution of Culture. Then his major understanding is what? That energy into technology determines culture. And majorly his understanding is culture energy approach. Culture energy approach. And he also believes that technology determines the female beauty. He also believes that technology determines female beauty. Right? Especially when there is greater technology and when there is greater resources. Women work less. When women work less, they majorly focus on what? Beauty. They majorly focus on what? Beauty. And you can also talk about Leslie Alvin White with respect to culturology, with respect to the science of culture or the culturology, especially with respect to emergence of culture. Because when you look at culture, now there are two, three perspectives with respect to culture. Sometimes they say culture is organic. Sometimes they say culture is super organic. And sometimes they say culture is supra biologic. Sometimes they say culture is organic, culture is super organic, or culture is supra biologic in nature. Right? Depending upon what is the perception. In the context of culture being organic, you see that culture was created by men. It was the invention of men, is what is the belief with respect to organic. Now, in the context of super organic, the culture was ready to be invented by men. That means it is not talking about the capability of human beings, but rather it is talking about the readiness of culture to be invented. That is super organic. In suprabiologic, it is talking about because of the cognitive development, because of the development in the thinking capacity, the culture was invented, and that could be seen in the context of suprabiologic. Right? So, that is one more understanding that you need to have. Then apart from that, you also see one more very famous equation of Leslie Alvin White is with respect to social organization. Social organization is nothing but N into P into R. Social organization is nothing but N into P into R. N is nutrition, P is protection, R is reproduction. N is nutrition, P is protection, R is reproduction, and S is what, my dear? Social organization. And S is social organization, right? So this is another very famous equation with respect to Leslie Alvin White. Then you can also talk about another person, that is Julian H. Stewart. In the context of Julian H. Stewart, he talks about man habitat interaction. He talks about man habitat interaction. And his major approach is what? The culture ecology approach. His major approach is what? Culture ecology approach. Culture ecology approach. Man habitat interaction is what is the book that has been written by with respect to Julian Stewart. And more importantly, you see his field work with respect to the Shoshone tribe. The Shoshone tribe of North America. And majorly his understanding is what? His understanding is talking about the multilineal evolution. His understanding is talking about the multilineal evolution. That means it is not single path of development of culture, but there are multiple paths for the growth of the culture. There are multiple paths for the growth of the culture. And he also talks about an important concept called as the culture core. He also talks about an important part called as culture core. Just write down one line. Just write down one line. It is the subset of culture. It is the subset of culture related to subsistence activities. It is subset of culture related to subsistence activities and exploitation of environment. And exploitation of environment. And exploitation of environment. There is another book which is written by Julian H. Stewart, The Theory of Cultural Change. The Theory of Cultural Change. That is the book which is written by Julian H. Stewart. Now, where all can you use Julian H. Stewart is you can definitely use Julian H. Stewart in 9.7. That is ecological anthropology, because his belief is what matter. His belief is culture, ecology approach. So definitely you can bring in 9.7. You can introduce this answer of 9.7. You can conclude the answer of 9.7 using Julian H. Stewart, right? And after this, you see, coming to the last approach of neo-evolutionism, that is biocultural approach, or the approach of general and specific evolution. One, the Shallins. Now, when you look at Shallins, he writes a book, Stone Age Economics. Shallins writes a book, Stone Age Economics, and he majorly talks about what? He majorly talks about the social stratification in Polynesia. The social stratification in Polynesia. That's one. He also believes in internal anti-surplus principle. Internal anti-surplus principle. Just write down one line. Write down one line. The societies with more domestic production. The societies with more domestic production underutilize resources and labor. Underutilize resources and labor. Next, he also writes an article, Poor Man, Rich Man, Big Man and Chief. Poor Man, Rich Man, Big Man and Chief, where again he is studying the political systems of Melanesia and Polynesia. Where he is again studying the political systems of Melanesia and Polynesia. I know Melanesian, Big Man, Polynesian, Chiefdom. Melanesian Big Man and Polynesian Chiefdom. Don't be confused. Most of the times we interchange, right? So, political system, in that also you can write Shallins. See, Shallins you can mention with respect to economic anthropology, especially in the context of third chapter. You see the principles of redistribution, reciprocity. There you can bring in the understanding of Shallins. You can definitely bring in with respect to chapter 4. Chapter 4 with respect to big men, chiefdom. All these are what, my dear? All these are majorly the classification with respect to the tribal forms of political systems which have been existing, right? And mostly these are what? Syphilis or asyphilis? These are asyphilis. Asyphilis means what? Mostly there is no formal head which has been existing, right? So asyphilis form of political systems are these which are present. Then apart from that, you also have service, element service. Element service. Now majorly, his understanding is with respect to what? Band, tribe, chiefdom, state. Band, tribe, chiefdom, state. And he also talks about something called as managerial benefit theory. He also talks about something called as managerial benefit theory. Just write down one line. The societies with chiefdom develop. The societies with chiefdom develop Because it is beneficial to centralized leadership. Because it is beneficial to centralized leadership. Because it is beneficial to centralized leadership. And also enables the bureaucratic organization to grow. And also enables the bureaucratic organization to grow. So again, service can also become important in chapter 3, in chapter 4. Element service becomes important in chapter 3 and chapter 4. Now please understand, there is also something called as biocultural approach. Now biocultural approach of Shawlins and service can again become important in 9.7. Can again become important in 9.7, can again become important in 1.4. Because you see, biocultural adaptations or biocultural approach, right? So that becomes important in 1.4 as well as 9.7. This could again be a conclusion when I'm writing 9.7. Biocultural approach of Shawlins and service, because that is what talks about what material? That is what talks about the general and specific evolution. That is what talks about the general and the specific evolution. Right? Now, those principles can either be used in tool technologies 1.8, 9.7, 1.4, right? So, wherever you can bring in this biocultural approach, you can use this Ellman, Service, and Marshall Shawlins. Now, the next is with respect to Marvin Harris. Next is with respect to Marvin Harris. Now, he writes a book, The Rise of Anthropological Theory. He writes a book, The Rise of Anthropological Theory. And majorly, you see, his idea is centered around Marxian materialism. Marxian materialism, cultural evolution, Marxian materialism, cultural evolution, and culture ecology. And culture ecology. And majorly his principles are what? Techno-environmental determinism. Techno-environmental determinism and techno-economic determinism. Techno-environmental determinism and techno-economic determinism. Now, you know, whole of his theory was dependent upon what material? Infrastructure, structure, and superstructure. Infra determining structure, structure determining superstructure, or infrastructure determining superstructure directly, but no other way condition which is existing. Now, you see, similar theory was also given by what material? You also see similar thing was given by Victor Turner with respect to what? Communitas, anti-communitas. In that condition, you see Victor Turner also talking about this 3 levels. And when we look at some of the case studies with respect to Marvin Harris, which are very relevant, that is with respect to with the change in mode of production, with change in mode of production, how did the urban ethos change? With change in mode of production, how did the ethos change? When he conducted the field work in Minas Gerais, this is a place with respect to Brazil. In Minhas Villas in Brazil, where he sees that the urban ethos have changed because the change in production has occurred. Now, where all can you write this? You can also substantiate this in the context of third chapter. Because in third chapter, what has happened, my dear, you know this production, distribution and consumption as a phenomenon is seen to be existing. Then, apart from that, you also see he talks about the pattern of race in America. He talks about the pattern of race in America, where he says there is an economic origin of racism. There is an economic origin of racism. That's again due to the mode of production that has changed in America. Then you also see another important area that he talks about is the sacred cow myth. Another important area is the sacred cow myth. Right? Then also another important study which can be seen is the shifting role of women. The shifting role of women in workforce and economy after World War II. The shifting role of women in workforce and economy after World War II. Right? Now that is one more area which you can definitely use, because now this is what is shift that can be related to what? One side it is feminism. The other side, how is infrastructure determining my superstructure? How is infrastructure determining my superstructure? In both the context, I can see how are women participating in economic systems. The major reason that you see after World War II why women have got into economic systems is the number of men have decreased. Because of warlike situation in certain areas, what happened? The number of men have decreased, and automatically to fill those positions where the men have decreased, the women have got into the workforce and the women have got into the economy, right? So that is one more understanding which has been brought in. Now, another very, very important thinker any given day who's again cannot be missed, just like Malinowski, R.C. Brown, E.B. Taylor, Strauss, Geeds. We can never miss Geeds. Mostly his understanding is with respect to what, my dear? The interpretative approach. His understanding is interpretative approach and majorly deals with various symbols, the symbolic anthropology. And he was influenced by the idea of what? He was influenced by the idea of the social fact, and his method was hermeneutics. His method of interpretation was hermeneutics, and he also emphasized on the thick description. He also emphasized on the thick description, and according to him, what symbols are nothing but vehicles of culture. Symbols are nothing but vehicles of culture. And majorly, his study is with respect to what? Balinese cockfight. Not only Balinese cockfight, but he also studies the Javanese funeral. He also studies the Javanese funeral. Just write down one line. Geets believes that analysis of culture. Geets believes that analysis of culture should not be experimental science. Should not be experimental science in search of law. Should not be experimental science in search of law, but an interpretative one. But an interpretative one in search of meaning. But an interpretative one in search of meaning. Now, where can you use this line? You can use this line in phenomenology. If you look at phenomenology, what was the understanding matter? I told you it is not scientific, it is not based on legal principles, but subjective reality. And Geets is one person who is closely associated with phenomenological studies. Right? So, Geets can also be written with respect to the phenomenological understanding there. And you can also write Geets with respect to what material? Geets with respect to religion. That is chapter 5. You can write Geets with respect to chapter 8. Chapter 8. And any given day, you can make a passing reference of Geets in the context of chapter 3.4. 3.4 in paper 2. That is especially the impact of religion on Indian society, impact of religion on Indian tribes. We can make a passing reference because most of the times what matter when you look at any religious expression and impact, you see most of the times religion has influenced what? The set of symbols which are seen to be present in the context of Indian society. Be it the impact of Hinduism, be it the impact of Islam, be it impact of Buddhism, Jainism, set of symbols. And depending upon the kind of interpretation that is made, you see the corresponding impact being studied on Indian society or Indian tribe. So make a passing reference with respect to Geets in this context, right? Then you have Victor Turner. Now when you look at Victor Turner, again, majorly symbols are means of social transformation. Majorly symbols are means of social transformation. And he was influenced by the idea of what? He was influenced by the idea of the social cohesion. He was influenced by the idea of social cohesion. And one area which Turner can definitely be used as liminality or rights the passage or communitas. Rights the passage or communitas. Because at the end of the day, all of this is indicating what matter? All of this is indicating transition. And all of this is indicating what? Statuslessness condition. Statuslessness condition. That means during be it liminality, be it rights the passage, be it communitas, there is no specific status which is present. It's a stage of transition which is present. So that can also be written. Then his study with respect to schism and continuity in African society. Schism and continuity in African society, that is the Ndembu society or the Ndembu village life. Ndembu village life, where he writes a book, The Forest of Symbols. Where he writes a book, The Forest of Symbols. Now, two famous rituals is with respect to the Madai tree Madai tree, especially with respect to the female puberty. The other one that you see is the Mukanda ceremony. The Mukanda ceremony of circumcision, especially with respect to the male puberty. Mukanda ceremony of the circumcision that you see with respect to male puberty. Another very, very important idea, right, highly expected as a 10 marker any given day, is the understanding of the social drama. The understanding of the social drama. Just write down a line here. Social drama. It's a spontaneous unit of social process. It's a spontaneous unit of social process. And everyone's experience in human society. And everyone's experience in human society. Everyone's experience in human society. Occurring with shared values, interest, and history. Occurring with shared values, interest, and history. Right? So you can bring in Turner in chapter 5. You can bring in Turner with respect to rites and rituals. Any given day. Right? In case in general question also in culture, in society, in socialization, in enculturation, any of these you can also definitely bring in Turner. Right? Because he deals with one, symbols as social operators. Two, symbols as means of social transformation. Three, he talks about social drama. Who was talking about social fact? Durkheim, right? And social fact, Durkheim and Geertz also had an influence on from social fact. That is one more extension that you need to remember. Social fact, social drama, social operators, social transformation, social organization, social institution. These are some of the important themes when it comes to 10 markers, right? So you can definitely use them again in this context. Now, apart from that, now when you look at this, especially in the context of cognitive anthropology, what do you see, my dear? You see whole of my culture is a mental construct. And in this you see Stephen A. Taylor and Harold C. Conklin. These are the two people who are present in cognitive anthropology. And for them it is all determined by what, my dear? Psychological anthropology. It is all determined by the psychological anthropology. And culture is mere expression of thought. And culture is all about present in mind. The theory of mind can be seen in the context of cognitive anthropology. Now, when you look at Stephen A. Taylor, Stephen A. Taylor was studying what, my dear? Stephen A. Taylor was studying especially with respect to the color combination which is existing. And more than color combination which has been existing, you see the comparison of Koya society and American society. Now you see different perspectives which were existing with respect to Koya society and American society. One, with respect to bamboos, the variety of bamboos. Two, with respect to Manchu, snow. That's another area where you see Stephen A. Taylor was working. And Stephen A. Taylor was majorly focusing upon what? The process of change as well as the similarities of internal structures. Process of change and the similarities of internal structure. That is another area where you see Stephen A. Taylor was focusing. Now when you see Harold C. Conklin, Harold C. Conklin was studying the color perception of Hanuno society. Sorry, I had mentioned that with Stephen A. Taylor. That is not Stephen A. Taylor. That is Harold C. Conklin. Color perception, Hanuno society. That means how is the color perceived? And the perception of color is fundamentally manifested within the thought, within the mind. Right? Now, majorly not much of application can be seen with respect to cognitive anthropology. But where can I make a passive reference to cognitive anthropology is Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in language. Now, Sapir-Whorf hypothesis in language. What do you see with respect to Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? It fundamentally believes in linguistic determinism, not relativism, determinism. And it believes language acts as a force on the mind influencing the thought. Language in itself is acting like a force which is influencing the thought. So that means what? Again, the theory of mind of cognitive anthropology is going to be manifesting in Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, right? So that is one more reference that you can definitely make with respect to cognitive anthropology. Now, postmodernism, again, not much of references, but mostly whenever you want to criticize your theories, we'll bring in what? Postmodern theory. If you want to criticize theories, you can bring in what? Postmodern theories which are existing, because mostly it is criticism with respect to ethnography. It is criticism with respect to ethnography, criticism with respect to anthropological thought, criticism with respect to anthropological thought, and right, mostly that is the area where you can bring in. That means whenever you want to see something revolutionary happening, you can bring in postmodern theory. Okay. So this is with respect to what? This is with respect to the thinkers of paper 1. Now, what do you see? Most of my socio-cultural can be completed with these thinkers. Now, in case if I go in the order, if I just want to consolidate, right? We'll just do that by looking at the syllabus, and then we'll get into the paper 2 thinkers. Now, you look at from 1.1 to 1.3. I can definitely use Franz Boas at any cost. I can definitely use E.V. Taylor, because whenever I'm talking about socio-cultural anthropology, I'll bring in E.V. Taylor with respect to 1.1 to 1.3. I can definitely use A.L. Kroeber in understanding of anthropology as science, right? I can use A.L. Kroeber's understanding there. Okay, is this clear? Then when I'm looking at 1.4, you see biological and cultural factors in human evolution. I'll talk about the biocultural approach with respect to Shawlins and Service, the general evolution and specific evolution with Shawlins and Service. Now, one common thing that I see with respect to 1.5 primates, who is one very famous thinker in primates? Jane Goodall. Right? Anything and everything regarding primates, you can bring in Jane Goodall. Okay. Now, when you look at 1.6, not much of thinkers that can be brought in, but when I get into strategic revision, specifically I will tell you one thinker for each fossil. Okay. Then, when I look at 1.8, definitely you can bring in G.V. Child. Definitely you can bring in G.V. Child. In Paleolithic, you can bring in Robert Brucefort. In Paleolithic, you can bring in Robert Brucefort. Then in Mesolithic, you can bring in Charles Carlyle. In Mesolithic, Charles Carlyle with respect to Mesolithic. In Neolithic, I told you can bring in G.V. Child. Right? Majorly 3 areas that you can talk about. Then in 2.1, with respect to culture, we can bring in Malinowski. We can bring in E.V. Taylor's definition. Then you can also bring in Leslie Alvin White with respect to the science of culture, culturology. Then with respect to ethnocentrism and cultural relativism, we'll definitely bring in Franz Boas. The understanding of culture personality school, because I already told you that cultural relativism has to be linked with historical particularism. When I link these two, automatically what will happen? I will have a relevance which is existing. And whenever we are talking about this, because in this you see, one thing that you see is ethnocentrism vis-a-vis cultural relativism. We know cultural relativism dominates And cultural relativism versus human rights, that is where we see human rights prevailing over cultural relativism. This is where we have Mark Junkter's understanding with respect to human rights. And what do we see? Cultural universalism is what is fundamentally upheld in this context. Now, when you look at marriage, in the context of marriage, certain important areas, one is G.P. Murdoch. The other person that you can definitely think about is W.N. Stephens. Definitely, W.N. Stephens. Then, in the context of marriage, again, Iravati Karve. That can be remembered with respect to marriage. Then again, family, you can also remember. I told you one, L.H. Morgan, the evolution of family, if you remember. Then again, family, G.P. Murdoch, that can be remembered. Right? Then in the context of kinship, you remember we were discussing about L.H. Morgan with kinship terminologies. That's one. R.C. Brown and Mayer Fortes with respect to descent theory. And Levi-Strauss with respect to alliance theory. And we had also seen R.C. Brown discussing about what material R.C. Brown joking relationship and avoidance relationship. And Levi-Strauss discussing about avunculate relation. Right? We have seen that with respect to kinship. Now in economic anthropology, definitely you will remember about Charlinson service in the context of redistribution, reciprocity, market, trade. You can bring in Charlinson service. Then you can also bring in with respect to Cohen, right? Cohen's classification with respect to these different societies, that is hunting, gathering, pastoralism, horticulture. That's one. Then in the context of political anthropology, you have Ellman service talking about evolution, right? And in religion, in evolutionary perspective, you will bring in what? You will bring in E.B. Taylor, you will bring in Fraser, you can also bring in Fraser there. Then in the context of psychological approach, Sigmund Freud with respect to psychological approach, and in the context of functional approach, you have Malinowski and R.C. Brown. Now monotheism and polytheism, we discussed about F.W. Schmidt, where multiple gods were added to monotheism becomes polytheism. What was the understanding there? Then in sacred and profane, we have Emile Durkheim being added. Right? In myth and ritual, you see myth with respect to Edmund Leach, you see with respect to Levi-Strauss, structural analysis of myth. In the context of rituals, you will see Wright's D passage in the context of Victor Turner. I can talk about that. Then magic, religion and science, you know James Fraser again. In 7th chapter, that is language, majorly you see Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Majorly you will see Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Now when you look at 8th chapter, that is field work, Malinowski, any given day, where you see pre-Malinowskian, Malinowskian and post-Malinowskian phase, that can be brought in. Then with respect to tools of data collection, you know participant observation, we discussed yesterday. Then in the context of questionnaire, you can bring in who? L.H. Morgan again. In the context of genealogy, you can bring in W.H.R. Rivers. Now with respect to various technological integrations, be it videograph, be it photograph, we can bring in Margaret Mead. That's all. Now what are these, my dear? Some mandatory thinkers that have to be put in your answer. Now when I am writing thinker is not question specific, thinker is chapter specific. Right? You realize this, again it's going to be easy to integrate thinkers, because most of us will think and will write only theory answers, but I would rather say please integrate thinkers through what? 6th chapter linked to other aspects of this, right? Now from there we'll slowly get into paper 2. Now one area that you see is Anantha Krishna Iyer. With respect to Anantha Krishna Iyer, you know his one of the founding fathers of Indian Anthro, right? Founding fathers of Indian Anthro. And in fact, M.N. Srinivas refers anthropology as ananthropology, right? Chumma, some punchline he gave, right? So that is the contribution that this person has made to Indian anthropology, growth of Indian anthropology. Majorly, his work has been the tribes and caste of Cochin. The tribes and caste of Cochin. Right? And he has also modified Risley's classification system. He has also modified Risley's classification, where he talks about the 14-point format of ethnographic survey. The 14-point format of ethnographic survey. He also writes tribe and caste of Mysore. Tribe and caste of Mysore. And a special mention of a tribal community here, the Kadar community. The Kadar community. And his belief was that a constant interaction with modernity led to cultural deterioration. A constant interaction with modernity led to cultural deterioration. And some of the important inspirations that Anandakrishna Iyer had, where he spoke about the agricultural basis of religion. Agricultural basis of religion in South India. And this was inspired from the study of Julian H. Stewart. Now, what was the approach given by Julian H. Stewart? Culture ecology approach. Culture ecology approach given by Julian H. Stewart that has inspired this. And another paper he writes is Primitive Culture of South India. Another paper he writes is Primitive Culture of South India. And that means mostly you see his study was centered around South India. Some tribes and caste. Two, the cultural interactions with modernity led to cultural deterioration. I can use it as a point in tribes. One. I can use it as a point in 5.3 where I see little tradition, great tradition interaction, or tradition and modernity interacting together. I can use it there. Now, when it comes to agricultural basis of religion in South India, now I can use that particular point in 5.1, village studies. I can bring in because I know there are 6 components of any village study. In that, one definite component is agriculture, the other component is religion. Where Anandakrishna Iyer fundamentally tried to understand the basis for both of them in southern Indian region. So, talk about 5.1 village studies, I can bring in that particular perspective. Then S.E. Roy. S.E. Roy is called as the father of Indian ethnology. Is called as the father of Indian ethnology. And majorly the studies with respect to tribal culture. Majorly the studies with respect to tribal culture, where he publishes Munda and their country. Munda and their country. And he also gives an ethnographic description of Orans, the Orans of Chota Nagpur, the Orans of Chota Nagpur. He also gives an explanation of village panchayat and Paraha system Now that means this Paraha system or Paraha panchayat, Paraha panchayat. Now that means this was majorly meant for what matter? This was majorly meant for resolving certain internal disputes. Now you see the modern democratic institutions. Now when you look at modern democratic institutions with some of the tribal institutions, what has happened, my dear? Somewhere there was consensus, that means they have accepted. Somewhere there was coordination where both of them were integrated. And third was, it was conflicted. Right? Something like Mundas had conflicted. Something like Goans have cooperated. Now in that context also what happens, my dear? You see, although we had modern democratic institution like Panchayat Raj system, we have certain instances of Paraha Panchayats existing. Right? So that can also be written. Then apart from that, he also has a monograph on Birhor. He also has a monograph on Birhor. And not only that, he had also made necessary contributions to the physical anthro. Physical anthro, where he studied certain physical characteristic features of Mundas. Where certain physical characteristic features of Mundas. Then apart from that, he also had certain archaeological excavations. He had also had certain archaeological excavations. That is the Asur site in Ranchi. The Asur site in Ranchi. That is where the age was converging with IVC. Where the age was converging with IVC. And mostly in this particular site, the copper, bronze, iron implements were found. The copper, bronze and iron implements were found. Then he had also examined the origin of caste in India. He had also examined the origin of caste in India. And you also see his contribution with respect to applied anthropology. You also see his contribution with respect to applied anthropology. Where one thing that you see is with respect to the role of Mundas in freedom movement. The role of Mundas in freedom movement. And his role was also very prominent with respect to the tribal welfare policy. Tribal welfare policy, especially with the legislations or legislative assemblies of Bihar and Odisha. with the legislative assemblies of Bihar and Odisha. Right? That means you see, more or less everywhere this person was there. In tribe and caste, he was there. Physical anthro, especially studying the physical characteristic features, the short stature, dolichocephaly, right, short nose, thick lips, all of these were certain the characteristic features which are present. Then apart from that, also important in applied anthropology, now especially you can use him in 9.1 to 9.3. Definitely. You can use him in fourth chapter, you can also bring him in 9.1 to 9.3. Role of anthropology in tribal development and role of anthropology in rural development. Now in this, definitely you can bring in SC Roy, and you can also bring him in with respect to interaction of the modern democratic institutions, Panchayat Raj institutions, the process of social change. Those aspects can also be brought in with respect to SC Roy. Then G.S. Gure, another important person. G.S. Gure. Now, majorly, he is the father of Indian sociology. He is the father of Indian sociology. You see his influence from W.H.R. Rivers. You see his influence from W.H.R. Rivers. And W.H.R. Rivers, what material? W.H.R. Rivers, diffusionism. W.H.R. Rivers, diffusionism. Just write down one line. Just write down one line. According to G.S. Gure, religion was the basis. Religion was the basis of social unity of India. Religion was the basis of social unity of India. Next. According to G.S. Gure, social change in India occurred through a slow process of assimilation. Of non-Aryans into Aryan fold. Right? See, majorly G.S. Gure has contributed to lot of Indological studies. G.S. Gure has contributed to lot of Indological studies. Then apart from that, he also says that there are various factors for diffusion of Vedic culture. One is language. Two, it is the marital alliance. Three, it is the role of sadhus. Diffusion of Vedic culture was seen here. Right? And one noticeable study of G.S. Gure is with respect to caste and race in India. One noticeable study that you see with respect to this is caste and race in India. Now, majorly when you look at caste, he had again Indological understanding with respect to caste, and he believed both of them were dependent or shaped by transition, transplantation, and transformation. Both of them were shaped by transition, transplantation, and transformation. Right? And you also see that the perceptions of Gure and Risley were converging. The perceptions of Gure and Risley were converging. Where, just write down one line, there was a correlation between race and caste. There was a correlation between race and caste, where higher caste approximated Indo-Aryan racial traits. Higher caste approximated Indo-Aryan racial traits, and lower caste have aboriginal non-Aryan traits. Aboriginal non-Aryan traits. Right? And also you see, Gure had a necessary contribution that was made with respect to understanding of untouchability. With respect to understanding of untouchability, where it was all about pure and impure. Where it was all about pure and impure. And he also advocates that administrative approach, administrative approach, training, migration, these can reduce untouchability. These can reduce untouchability. Then also Gure made necessary contributions with respect to tribes in India. Gure made necessary contribution with respect to tribes in India. Now majorly he believed tribes were backward Hindus. He believed tribes were backward Hindus. And what was the nature of his approach towards tribal development, my dear? Assimilationist. Because Veria Relevance isolationist was criticized by Thakkar Baba and G.S. Gure. Their national park approach, isolationist tendencies with respect to Elvin, that was different. Extinction was assimilationist, where they were considered to be part of Hindus, backward Hindus. And slowly you see the evolution of integrationist approach. Again, you see tribal Panchashil being embedded, right? So that is the fundamental approach that is existing with respect to tribal development. So one more aspect is this. And he also had reference that was made with respect to the separatist movements of Northeast. Separatist movements of Northeast. Where the separatist movements of Northeast was a resultant of the cultural distinction. The cultural distinction between tribes and Hindu society. Between tribes and Hindu society. Right? Write down one more line he talks about. According to Gure, national integration is based on, according to Gure, national integration is based on social and religious integration, social and religious integration, Next, national integration should be achieved by national integration should be achieved by absorption of absorption of diverse religious and backward groups, diverse religious and backward groups in mainstream Hindu society, in mainstream Hindu society. Right? Next, N.K. Bose, Nandlal Kumar Bose. N.K. Bose, right? He brings in relation between anthropology and Indian freedom struggle. Anthropology and Indian freedom struggle. Majorly, he is influenced by American diffusionism. Majorly, he is influenced by American diffusionism. And his idea was also influenced by the biocultural approach, the biocultural functionalism of Malinowski. Biocultural approach of Malinowski. And he was also influenced by Indology. He was also influenced by Indology. Now, some of his studies, one is with respect to caste system. One is with respect to caste system. Right? He was associated with the concept of purity and pollution. He was associated with the concept of purity and pollution. Just write down one line. Caste persisted, according to N.K. Bose. According to N.K. Bose, caste persisted. Caste persisted because of cultural and economic security. Because of cultural and economic security it provides. It provides. Next, according to him, caste is non-competitive. Caste is non-competitive, hereditary, occasion-based productive organization. Vocation-based productive organization, and operated in isolated villages. And operated in isolated villages. This is with respect to what? Caste perception of N.K. Bose. Now, what all articles has he written? When you look at N.K. Bose, one, the Hindu mode of tribal absorption. The Hindu mode of tribal absorption. Other, you see caste in India. Caste in India. Then, some aspect of caste in Bengal. some aspect of caste in Bengal. Next, just write on one line. The tribal customs. Tribal customs and rituals are modified. And rituals are modified in process of social absorption. In process of social absorption. In mainstream Hindu community. In mainstream Hindu community. Definitely you can bring in N.K. Bose with respect to influence of Hinduism on tribal societies. Right? Don't forget about one is N.K. Bose and the other one is G.S. Gure. Both of these will have to be brought in whenever you're writing influence of tribes with respect to Hinduism. Okay. Next, the studies that N.K. Bose has done with respect to the tribes is Zhuangs of Odisha. Zhuangs of Odisha. Especially the issue associated with migration. Especially the issue associated with migration. Now, as part of migration, you see what has happened, my dear, Sanskritization of tribes started happening. Or we can also talk about detribalization. Detribalization or Sanskritization, because you see the Pallahara migrants undertaking the wet rice cultivation. The Pallahara migrants undertaking the wet rice cultivation and Dhenkanal undertaking the oil milling. Undertaking the oil milling. Now you can write this in 6.2. You can write this in 6.2. Then he also studied about Bhils, the Bhil tribe. Where in Bhil tribe, what has happened? In Bhil tribe, what has happened? With the influence of Hinduism, they justified the subsistence as thieves. With the influence of Hinduism, they justified the mode of subsistence as thieves. Right? So that is one more aspect with respect to N.K. Bose. Then one more work you can remember about N.K. Bose is caste, continuity and change in Calcutta. Caste, continuity and change in Calcutta. Where he has studied the urban ecosystem could disintegrate caste system. The urban ecosystem could disintegrate caste system. right? So that was the study that was done, because in this urban ecosystem, majorly the principles of modernization, the principles of industrialization, and the commercial intent, and the commercial intent, then he had also contributed to the understanding of peasant life in India. Peasant life in India, where he has given the pyramidal structure, where he has given the pyramidal structure of Indian civilization. He has given the pyramidal structure of Indian civilization. And majorly, you see, the Indian civilization was seen to be flourishing because of trade and economic exchanges. Trade and economic exchanges, and also the mobility of sages, thinkers, and artists. The mobility of sages, thinkers, and artists. This is with respect to N.K. Bose, right? Now that means we're all, see, the whole agenda here is tribe, caste, village. You look at G.S. Gore, you look at S.C. Roy, you look at Ananta Krishna Iyer, you look at N.K. Bose. Their understanding is we are only writing those studies which are related to tribe, caste, village. Now that means any related perspective of these three dimensions in paper 2, I can bring in 2-3 thoughts of each of these thinkers. That is the idea, right? Again, not writing out of the box thinkers. Whatever we know, we will write first, because I always believe whatever you know in basic, examiner also will know. And please understand, my dear, somebody from anthropology branch, you expect them to upgrade so much that it is not going to happen. Maybe in their respective field of research, they will upgrade. But otherwise, why would they upgrade in other branches of anthropology? Not required. But definitely some baseline thinkers will be there. Whatever we are discussing is all baseline thinkers, right? So that is the idea, to maintain commonality in writing. Next, I think last thinker for today, that is D.N. Majumdar. Other thinkers, as we proceed as part of the course, we will continue. That is, as we proceed in strategic revision, we will do. Okay? Now, D.N. Majumdar, you see, his work is with respect to a tribe in transition. A tribe in transition, a study in culture pattern. A tribe in transition, a study in culture pattern, where he comes up with an approach called as mark. For what? Studying human culture. M is man, that is dealing with the biological needs. A is area, that is dealing with respect to geography. R is with respect to resources. C is with respect to cooperation. It is with respect to cooperation. Yes, just write down one line. He believes. He believes. Social change should not be disruptive. He believes social change should not be disruptive. Rather, rather, it should ensure continuity. Rather, it should ensure continuity with existing cultural traditions. With existing cultural traditions. One more you write. He believes in, he believes in creative or generative adaptation approach. Creative or generative adaptation approach for development of indigenous tribes. For development of indigenous tribes. By considering their existing skills. By considering their existing skills. Easy? Next. He also has a work that is caste and communication in Indian village. Caste and communication in Indian village, where the developmental programs, how did it influence the cultural change? How did it influence the cultural change? And he also believes village is a way of life. Village is a way of life. It's a constellation of values. It's a constellation of values. Changing slowly, but retaining the identity. Changing slowly, but retaining the identity. That you also know Majumdar had contribution with respect to dominant caste. Right? Definite contribution with respect to dominant caste. Right? Next. He also writes or he also studies about Himalayan polyandry. He also studies about Himalayan polyandry, where the shortage of females is the reason for fraternal polyandry. The shortage of females is the reason for fraternal polyandry. Excuse me. Right? Now he also has some contribution with physical anthro. He also has some contribution with physical anthro. where he had done anthropometric and serological surveys. Anthropometric and serological surveys in regions of UP, Bengal, and Gujarat. In regions of UP, Bengal, and Gujarat. Right? And he also majorly supported the racial origin of caste system. He also supported the racial origin of caste system. Just write down one more important area where he studies. In his work, Race and Culture of India. In his work, Race and Culture of India, Majumdar defined race. Majumdar defined race as a group of people. Majumdar defined race as a group of people by their possession of common physical traits. By their possession of common physical traits. Can be distinguished from others. Can be distinguished from others. Next, one more line. He studied ABO and RH blood group. He studied ABO and RH blood group among criminal tribes of UP. Among criminal tribes of UP. Next. Next. He also studied the ontogenetic development in Indian children. The ontogenetic development in Indian children. What is ontogenetic study? That is oncology. Ontogenetic study. See, ontogenetic study is all about how is an individual growing. Right? You see different growth studies. In growth studies, we have three methods, you remember? Longitudinal method, cross-sectional method, mixed longitudinal. Now here in ontogenetic study, what do? You observe an individual, how are they growing from birth till death. And that means what all processes are influencing their growth and development is observed. Now that is why we see D.N. Majumdar has quite some contributions to physical anthro, be it race, be it 9.6, that is ABO and RH, or be it with respect to growth studies. You can definitely mention D.N. Majumdar. Is this clear? Anthropometric and serological surveys, that is 12th chapter. 12th chapter, that is applied anthropology. Is this clear? Right? So basic understanding with respect to D.N. Majumdar. Right? I think we'll continue with other thinkers as we progress across sessions. I think by now the agenda is very clear. What's required, what we will do, and what are we going to do. Tomorrow we'll start off physical anthro as part of strategic revision, right? And physical anthro will go on for 3 days. 3 days will finish whole physical anthro. Majorly the agenda will be what? Structures, thinkers, filler points, case studies. I will not be explaining anything extra. No detailed explanation, only structure focus. Thinkers, because most of the people do not include thinkers in physical anthro. And we will also look at some case studies for every chapter 9.1, 9.2, 9.3, some common case studies, and we will include those case studies. Is this clear? Right? More or less, it's again going to be a revision notes that you will have to be ready with. Okay? Again, roughly over 100-120 pages of total anthropology notes will be there from strategic revision. All that you will have to do is kindly revise it on a daily basis. And I don't think anything shorter can be made because the revision will get over fast. Is this clear? Your base notes will be there as it is, along with which you will have this value addition notes. Is this clear? Right? We'll meet tomorrow. Thank you. Is SRM free for old batch of anthro? I already told. Old batch of anthro means those batches which were handled by me. That means batch of ante eppudo 2019 batch of anthropology I did not handle, right? So that is batch of 24 and 25, specifically those 4-5 batches that I have handled in specific, right? If you have any doubt regarding that, you can message me. Is this clear? Right? I think I'll also put that message in your group. You don't have to worry, right? Okay, we'll meet tomorrow. Thank you.